Hello and welcome back to another episode of the College 12 Pack. I'm your host, Tyler Natuno, and with me once again is my friend Ryan Haley, the managing editor of Duke Wire. So Ryan, we're really coming down the home stretch here of the offseason. Only 2 more Saturdays to go before we get to week 0. So very exciting on that front. And now that we've sort of wrapped up our preseason looks at these conferences, at the power conferences in the group of 5, which is what we did last week, we're going to kind of veer into a discussion that I know is at the forefront of a lot of people's minds. You know, it's always something that gets a lot of attention throughout the year, and especially at this point going into the year. We're going to look at which coaches are facing the most pressure going into 2024, which ones find themselves, if not on the hot seat, on the verge of being on the hot seat. But before we get into that, some pretty significant news in college football regarding the defending national champions. So earlier this week, notice of allegations from the NCAA against Michigan leaks regarding the Connor Stallion sign stealing situation. And I think, to me, the most interesting detail here is Sharon Moore, the new Michigan coach who was previously the offensive coordinator last season, hit with level 2 violations. And apparently they've dug up 52, I believe, deleted text messages between Sharon Moore and Connor Stallions. And we don't know the contents of those messages, but they were apparently able to retrieve them. So the NCAA has those messages in their possession. And then also some level 1 violations for some other staffers, including Chris Partridge, the linebackers coach, who was fired over this last season. And then also Jim Harbaugh, who's obviously now in the NFL. So we'll kind of see what all this ends up meaning, but I just kind of wanted to see what your sort of take on this whole situation is as we head into the season for Michigan.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head that the most important and topical part of this now relates to Sharon Moore. But the most interesting part about it to me stemmed from Harbaugh's press conference, now obviously now the head coach of the LA Chargers, where Harbaugh actually went out of his way. Like, he set up his answer of like, if I had done something wrong, I've been raised to apologize, but I'm not apologizing because I didn't do anything wrong. And the NCAA's statement is like, no, you did like a lot of stuff wrong, like level 1 infractions, multiple of them. Uh, so I believe the words they used were he violated the COVID dead period for recruiting and intentional disregard for NCAA legislation. Um, and Harbaugh going out of his way to not only deny wrongdoing, but deny wrongdoing in a way that's like, well, I wouldn't do that because I don't do anything wrong and I am like too good of a person to like violate rules like that is a very interesting response because to me, it feels like you're throwing Sharon Moore under the bus a little bit and just backing over him on the way out. And it obviously is going to be a bad look that Harbaugh left for the NFL immediately as soon as he won this national championship and these allegations come out, but treating it as if, like, at bare minimum, the response, even if he had no knowledge of what was going on, the response should have been, it was still my program. I was still the head coach. I can't comment on an ongoing legislation, whatever. But going out of your way to be like, I don't care what the assistant coaches were doing. I didn't know anything about it and I did nothing wrong just feels bizarre. And to double down in the way and the manner in which he did was just strange.
Yeah. And just one quick point of clarification that I want to make for people listening. The Jim Harbaugh had to deal with kind of two totally separate NCAA things that came out this week. There was the Connor Stallion sign stealing thing, which he is named in, but also he was hit with a 4-year show cause for completely unrelated the COVID-19 recruiting violations that they allegedly had a few years ago. So, I mean, I don't know what you think about this. I think there's almost no chance Jim Harbaugh ever coaches for a college team again. So I'm not sure this show cause is really going to matter to that much. But I think it is interesting. And you kind of led me to the point that I really want to get into here, which is, you know, whether Jim Harbaugh knew or didn't know about the Connor Stallion stuff, I'm not sure we'll ever know the answer to that question. And to be honest, like at this point, he's gone. He's in the NFL. It's kind of like a who cares thing. But like, do you buy that Sharon Moore, the offensive coordinator, like somehow didn't know? Like, I don't have any information here, but it's like, do you really buy that he had no idea like where these signs were coming from, like what Connor Stallions was doing? I kind of find that
No.
pretty hard to believe.
No, there's no
Yeah.
shot. Like, especially every I always and we had the same conversation as NFL fans about the Patriots years ago with Tom Brady and Bill Belichick about the Flakegate. Like, there's a certain tier of person you reach in the organization where I just have a hard time believing you didn't know something was going on. And
Mhm.
Harbaugh and Sharon Moore both reached that stage in Michigan. So I don't, at bare minimum, the reason they wouldn't have known is like gross negligence.
Mhm.
And I don't buy it.
Yeah, I could see them intentionally shielding Harbaugh from it. Like I could see that being an intentional like give him enough plausible deniability to where if this goes south, he's not screwed. But I find that hard to believe, and I find it especially hard to believe. I mean, with Sharon Moore, and we'll see what
Yeah.
ultimately they recovered. I mean, maybe they were just talking about something random that had nothing to do with the sign stealing incidents. But
I I would be sure, yeah, delete like who among us hasn't deleted a text
yeah,
message? It's innocuous.
52 of them with one
52 of
person.
them that are totally innocuous and have
Yeah.
nothing to do with your ongoing legislative battle. Um, no, I mean, I think to me, I agree with you. Like, I don't think Sharon Moore on paper would have had a problem with, I'll take the responsibility for this because Harbaugh is no longer a college football coach. I do think Sharon Moore would probably, I don't know their relationship, obviously, behind closed doors. I feel like if I were Sharon Moore, sure, if I'm in this with you, I'm probably going to be like in for a penny, in for a pound. I'll take the blame and take the sanctions now that you're gone. I'd probably have a problem with you being like, I had no idea what Sharon was doing and it's despicable that he cheated. It's like, no, come on, man.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah, and when it comes to those sanctions and the whatever penalties we're going to see come from this, like I don't really know how to feel about it because on the one hand, like I think we've seen recently, the NCAA is pretty toothless, especially at this point, to do much of anything. But this is kind of one of the few situations that like there's so few things that can actually enforce nowadays that this is really one of the ones that entirely falls under their purview. Like this is
I
just
do
cheating,
think,
like competitive advantage.
I do think the gamble here, in talking about how toothless the NCAA is, if this results in something that isn't a postseason ban, and doesn't strip them of the 2023 national championship. It just kind of further emphasizes how toothless the NCAA is to me. Of
Mhm.
like, this is something that everybody knew was happening in October. This is
Yeah.
something that Michigan's team was rallying around as adversity they were facing in the middle of last season. And if the NCAA understands that, like, mid-season, that a team is violating protocol or violating rules in such a way, lets them win a national championship, and then hits them with something other than a postseason ban, that's not a rule. That's just like a speed bump. It doesn't do anything. And so I think that's really the position they're in now. Like, if you intentionally punt this resolution until after they win the national championship and then don't do anything that tangibly affects their 2024 season, what did you really accomplish?
Yeah, and we'll just have to see how much they ultimately come down. I mean, I'll be honest, like I don't really care. It's not I'm not I
Hmm.
don't like think that Michigan didn't win that title legitimately or whatever. Like I think if anything it helped them probably more in the 2 years prior than in the 2023 season. But yeah, I mean, I think the odds that Sharon Moore escapes this without having to serve any kind of suspension or anything like that, I think that seems pretty unlikely to me.
Yeah.
We'll see how far they actually go. But before we move on, there was just one thing that in this notice of allegations, it was kind of they buried the lead on this one a little bit, but we got some resolution to one of the weirder elements of this whole thing, which was, if you remember, the season opener between Central Michigan and Michigan State. There was a guy that looked a lot like Connor Stallions in like a rudimentary disguise spotted on the sideline. And Central Michigan had this really bizarre response where they were like, we don't know who this is. Like, we cannot tell you who this staffer is, but we know it's not Connor Stallions. And it's like, what? Well, it was Connor Stallions, according to the NCAA. They have now determined that that was in fact Connor Stallions. So kind of unfortunate that Central Michigan finds itself kind of in the crossfire here. But man, talk about a callback.
I'm not going to lie to you. This didn't register much for me because I thought we all kind of just agreed that Central Michigan was lying. Like, I thought we
Mm-hmm.
all were just like, that, there's no way that's not Collar Stallions. Look at them. We all just kind of moved on. So that was like part of why it didn't register for me. But yeah, getting that confirmation is a hilarious addition to this.
Yeah, great way to kind of wrap up the saga. And we'll see, what all ultimately comes of it. Like this was just a leaked draft of the notice of allegation. So, I mean, there could still be changes, between now and when things become truly official. But that wasn't the only piece of news this week that came around for a potential playoff contender. And this one's a lot more, I think, impactful on this year's chances. CJ Baxter at Texas, running back who was expected to be a huge playmaker for them, a former 5-star recruit, kind of becoming the feature back this year, injured his LCL and PCL. He is out for the year and needs knee surgery. So, I think a Texas team that we're both fairly bullish on, maybe to varying extents, but I mean, they've got guys here. Like, I mean, they got Jaden Blue and Trey Wisner, who both got some carries last year, not a ton. They've got a true freshman in Jared Gibson, who was a top 150 prospect. Like, there's talent in this room, but like, how significantly does this impact your thoughts on this Texas team and what their ceiling is?
Yeah, I think this specifically doesn't have much of an impact on my thoughts on Texas. I think I'm a little less bullish than you are. Um, but yeah, I don't think the gap between like that running back room and that running back room plus CJ Baxter is really enough to move the needle for me in terms of what the team is going to be. Um, I think they're pretty clearly a playoff contender. I also think they would pretty clearly be kind of a surprise winner. I think anybody other than Georgia would be a bit of a surprise winner in the SEC, but I think them specifically would be a bit of like still a bit of a surprise winner in the SEC. So I think we texted about this the other day. I think my SEC power rankings going into the season is like Georgia tier 1, and before this, I had Texas at the top of tier 2. Maybe they get shuffled down 2 or 3 spots, but I feel like all those teams in tier 2 have questions, and I think that how does Texas replace CJ Baxter is not as important as how does Alabama replace Nick Saban? How does LSU replace Jaden Daniels? How does Oklahoma replace Dylan Gabriel? Like, all of these teams outside of Georgia are losing someone pretty key, and I don't think CJ Baxter, obviously wishing him a speedy recovery and not to diminish what an injury does to a running back, especially in his like physical prime. But I don't think losing CJ Baxter is the biggest loss that a team contending for that second SEC championship spot has suffered thus far.
Yeah, so I definitely think I am a little bit more high on this Texas team, or at least have been, than you are. I had them in the SEC championship when we previewed that conference a couple weeks ago. I think that they are closer to Georgia maybe than you do. Like, I don't think the gap there is quite as big. And I kind of hinted that I'm like, at least throughout the offseason, was sort of considering making them my SEC pick. I don't think this is like going to keep them from making a run. Like, if they were going to be a playoff team, like an SEC contender, I think that's still the case. But like, I'm not going to lie. Like, this does, I think, impact my feelings on this team a little bit, just because of how loaded I felt like they were with playmakers, even with what they lost on offense at receiver last year. And with Jonathan Brooks, obviously, who going to the NFL and missed the second half of last season with a torn ACL. Like, just in having another injury to that room, like, it's just another guy that they're not going to have that they were relying on. Like, I think this is still a playoff team, but I'm a lot less confident this is a team that's going to give Georgia a run for its money, even though, like, I don't think obviously a running back injury is the most significant thing that can happen to you. I do think it's going to hurt them.
Yeah. I think this is one of the few teams with the firepower, the program recognition, and the schedule that they could potentially lose 3 games and still get an at-large bid. I think that's how highly everyone thinks of them, and obviously you add Isaiah Bond to that room. But yeah, my questions. This is a longer conversation for another day. We're going to fly by this, but like my questions mostly have to do with Quinn Ewers and like losing Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell and what that does to that receiver room, and some questions I had from his tape last year, and like maybe losing CJ Baxter puts you a little behind the chains more often, which puts more on his plate. But I don't necessarily think it drastically changes the outlook of that offense. I think any questions you had about Texas going in or didn't have about Texas, you probably did not gain or lose them based on this piece of news.
Yeah, and I think what you just said about like falling behind the chains, like to me, that is, I think, kind of what my thought process is here, because I also am skeptical about Quinn Ewers. Like, I think I've seen some really nice moments from him, but I've also seen some moments where he doesn't quite look like he's like he's the guy
There
that we
were
thought he would be?
there were a lot of plays last year where Worthy or Mitchell were way downfield and either got missed or had to make
Yeah.
an incredible play on the ball.
Yeah. And I think there's reason to think, I mean, he could be better. He's still,
Mhm.
he's a redshirt junior this
21,
year going
22,
into
yeah.
yeah, like he's a young guy. Like
Mhm.
and I just don't quite buy the like this dude's going to be a Heisman contender and top 5 NFL draft pick. I think that's going to require a leap if either of
Yeah.
those things are going to
Mhm.
happen. But yeah, I think that kind of just about covers that. So let's get it. Let's go ahead and sink our
Let's
teeth into the
let's
hot
do
seat
what people came
conversation.
here for.
Exactly. And we're going to start off with the conference. This is in no particular order. And to kind of gamify this a little bit, what I want to do is we're going to talk about these guys, but then we're going to each give them a 1 to 5 score of hot seat. So 1 being you are absolutely safe, like you're in statue territory. 5 being like you're packing your bags before the calendar turns to November. So I think we're just going to start this off in a pretty natural place. Ryan, I know you and I both want to talk about this, so we'll just get it out of the way before we spend way too much time on it. Billy Napier at Florida. I'll just say this right off the bat. I really do not think that Florida wants to fire Billy Napier this year. I think that Florida will be looking for every possible excuse this season to keep Billy Napier around in 2025. I don't think they want to pay that buyout, go through another coaching change. I just don't think they want to do that.
Especially with President Ben Sass stepping away. Do
Mm-hmm.
you know if they're still paying, is it Muschamp? Are they still paying Muschamp or?
I don't know. They got to still be paying Dan Mullen. There's no
Oh, they're
way they're
100%.
not
They're
paying Dan
100% still
Mullen.
paying Mullen, but like 90% of my question for like, are they going to fire Billy Napier is like, are they paying 1 buyout or 2 already? Because they want to pay
Yeah.
3 and like 3 at once.
I I actually don't think that's like going to be the main question here. Like I think it's wins and losses. I truly do think it's wins and losses. Like I think if they go 5-7, I don't think he's going to be the coach here in 2025. Like I think like they don't want to do it, but if their hand is forced, I think that they will. But I think they'll be looking for every reason. So like my kind of thought process is here. Like I think 6-6 probably gets the job done if it's the right
especially with
6.
that schedule.
Yes, with the schedule, which granted, like I think it's getting a little bit too much play. Like it is a tough schedule on paper. Obviously, like there's no way all of those teams are going to be as good as it looks like they're going to be right now.
No.
There will be games that are easier wins than it appears at this moment in time. So I think 6-6 probably gets the job done if it's the right 6. But I do think that if you want to avoid us having these exact same conversations again this time next season about Billy Napier, it's probably got to be more like 7 or 8, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, I mean, I think 6-6 keeps his job to 2025, but it makes him the number 1 guy in this conversation again next year, exactly like you
Yes.
were just saying. I think the big questions for me, I think the biggest question for me is obviously from watching a lot of Florida football, there are a lot of questions about his offensive play calling, something that Napier's been reluctant to give up, and something that fans have noted as being pretty conservative and risk averse thus far, and pretty uncreative. A lot of screens, a lot of underneath passes, a lot of runs. Doesn't really try and throw past the sticks on big third downs. Had a 2-score lead against Florida State at home with a bowl game on the line and kind of blew it with some conservative play calling. But he has Graham Mertz, who led the SEC in completion percentage last year, redshirt senior, I believe. Very competent quarterback, not especially inspiring to a fan base, but more than good enough to win 6-7 games. And you have 5-star true freshman DJ Lagway behind him. If you're Billy Napier, you have Miami week 1, UCF early on. If you lose 2 of your first 3 or 4 games, at what point does the water around Billy start feeling hot enough that he throws Lagway further and further into the offense? Because I feel like there's a non-zero chance that the only way Billy Napier saves his job is DJ Lagway looking like a future Heisman finalist.
Yeah.
And I wonder if there's a point in the season where if Billy's like a game below 500, 2 games below 500 with big teams coming up, does he hand the reins to Lagway in like a last-ditch effort of like, I need you to look like a 5-star quarterback or I am going to get fired?
Yeah. I mean, I've also thought about that. And I think I think it's definitely possible. I think it's less likely just because of the way the schedule works out. Like it's definitely backloaded. So there's a really good chance this team could start like 5-1 and finish
and miss a
5-7.
bowl. Yeah,
Yeah, like that could totally happen.
100%.
So
But
I think, yeah, what were you saying?
if Miami and UCF are both as good as they could be, and there's a stumble, I feel like that even raises the pressure of like if you start 2-2 with that backloaded schedule, I think that makes the questions even louder. And so
Oh,
I
I
think
think if
that
this
like
team, 2-2
if you
start, man, we're having
you lose
bad conversations.
you go 2-2, you might go 4-8.
Yes. And I
So
think
yeah.
I think the thing with Billy too this year that's so tough because I'll just say right now, I have Billy as a 4 on the hot seat scale. I am as a 4. I don't
So did I.
if I had to bet right now, I think he will be the coach of the Gators in 2025. But the problem here, just with the schedule, even if it ends up being nicer than you think, it's going to be such a fine line between like 4-8 and 7-5. Like we saw last year, it was a fine line between 5-7 and 7-5.
The Arkansas game.
The Arkansas game was blown. The 4th down conversion against Missouri. This team easily could have gone 7-5 last year.
Yeah.
So,
and if that's the case,
but,
Napier's like high key becoming like, is he building something
yeah,
in Florida? Like what? Like yeah. So
yeah. I think the concerns here, because I actually like the roster. I don't think it's elite in a lot of places, but I think it's the best one he's had so far here. And I don't think it has a lot of glaring weaknesses, assuming the top end stays healthy. But I do have concerns about Billy. Like you mentioned, the play calling is one of them, but like just operationally, this team was such a mess last year. Special teams gaffes, having multiple guys on the field with the same number, the amount of times they had either 12 or 10 men on the field, like
which is the
just,
entire thing he sold himself on when he showed up
yeah,
in Gainesville. He's like,
attention to detail.
I am going to be a Nick Saban
Yeah,
disciple. There's going no detail too small. We are going to like turn every stone. Like that's what you sold yourself on. And you're not a phenomenal play caller, but you never pretended to be. But procedural penalties and a not good play caller, you can't do that in the SEC.
yeah. No, 100%. Like, I think those are, to me, the biggest questions Billy has to answer because I don't think the roster is an excuse anymore. It's not Georgia level, but it's not an excuse anymore.
I think the worst case scenario for Florida football fans is like a really uninspiring 6-6 where like UCF stinks, Cam Ward doesn't pan out in Miami, and A&M under year one and Mike Elko is like fine. And like those are the 3 big wins that Florida needs to get to 6-6. And then like the offense looks shaky and Lagway looks uncomfortable. That's like the worst case scenario. Like Florida, I agree with you. I think Florida kind of needs an excuse to fire Napier this year. They don't need a reason. They need an excuse not to, or they need an excuse not to fire him. They don't need a reason to fire him.
Yeah.
And I think a like really uninspiring 6-win season is like kind of the worst case scenario for me.
Yeah.
For a Florida football team is like you go into 2025 and it's just we're doing this again.
No, the worst case scenario is like kind of the situation I laid out where you start 5-1 or whatever, and then you end the season losing to Georgia, Texas, LSU, Ole Miss, Florida State, like all in a row. All the vibes are dead. You've just gotten killed by a bunch of your rival, maybe not killed, but whatever. Like that would be, I think, the worst situation because I don't think they fire him there, but I think the vibes are horrendous going into 2025. But yeah, so we both have.
You're in like uncomfortable conversation. You are like if Napier fails, the next coach is like, dude, you like are inches from Nebraska. Like that is the path that you're walking down. If you,
which is why I really don't think they want to make a change. Like they don't want to be that team that's looking for a coach every 5 years, like they have been. But is what it is.
Like, would you rather be the team that looks for a coach every 3 years, or the team that decides like unimpressive 6-6 is enough? Because I feel like both of those are a statement about your current program. But
definitely some big questions. We both got Billy at a 4. I know we could talk about this all day, so I'll try to keep us on track here and move it along. But yeah, I think big questions to answer in Gainesville, obviously, this season. But I'm going to take us to a guy in the SEC that, to me, I think is under even more pressure. And if I had to bet on who the first coach in the Power 4 that's fired this year is, I'm going Sam Pittman at Arkansas.
This is one of my 3 5s. I have 3 5s on this list. He's one of them.
I also have him as a 5. He's actually my only 5. I debated on a couple, and he's my only 5. So I'll give you that spoiler right now. But to me, the thing with Pittman is like this guy so barely even survived last year, I think. And, after having that 9-4 in 2021, it looked like, because to me, like this always felt like a bridge coach move. Like, I don't think they quite knew what to do here. And they just hired the Georgia offensive line coach. Like, whatever, we'll see if this works. Actually looked like it was working pretty well. But in the 2 years since, just have really fallen off. Don't look like a team that's really set to make any noise in the new SEC. And I think that's a problem. I think, not sky high expectations at this program, but more than where they've been the last 2 years. And I think to me, the key point with Pittman here is his contract situation, because he is 20-18 overall since 2021. Now, Sam Pittman has a clause in his contract that if his overall record since 2021, so disregarding the COVID season where they went 3-7, if his record since 2021 drops below 500, his buyout number is slashed in half. I think that's very significant, and I think they're going to find themselves potentially having the opportunity to take advantage of that earlier than not. Reminder, he is 20-18 currently since 2021.
Yeah, I think Pittman to me is the biggest example of like the knife's edge of the SEC. He in 2021, 2022, he won 16 games, which was the best 2-year span of Arkansas football since 2010 and 11. And last year he lost a one-score game to BYU when I believe they had a missed field goal, a fumble, and an interception in the second half to lose by 7. Lost one-score game to LSU, Ole Miss, Bama, and Mississippi State, which the Mississippi State one was pretty inexcusable. But now this year they have Ole Miss, Texas, and Mizzou in their last 4 games. And I think those 3 are, by and large, other than like we have questions about Ewers, there are obviously going to be questions about whether Lane Kiffin can actually step up as a 10-11 win coach now that the expectations are there. But I feel like all 3 of those teams are pretty comfortable bets to be much, much better than Arkansas. So if you count those 3 as losses, in order for Arkansas to make a bowl game, they need to beat 2 of Oklahoma State, Auburn, Texas A&M, Tennessee, or LSU. You win 2 of those 5 games. And I don't know if you can do the and that's kind of the knife's edge of like if he wins 1 or 2 of those one-score games last year, totally different conversation, probably. But then it comes to like the Scott Frost problem. I'm probably on the brain because we just talked about Nebraska. Like you lose one-score games to good teams, that's well and good. If you keep losing one-score games to good teams, that doesn't really do anything. So,
yeah. And I think this program is probably starting to feel a little bit of, I guess, like antsiness about its place in this conference, because for a while, Arkansas was kind of they could kind of step into that old like Southwest Conference footprint in the SEC because they were the only team there. Well, they added A&M in 2012. Now Texas and Oklahoma are here. Like whatever recruiting advantage you had in that region is now completely erased. So I don't know what this team is in the new SEC. I'm not sure this program knows what it is in the new SEC.
I don't think the losses of quarterback KJ Jefferson and running back Raheem Sanders are getting enough press. Like like those 2 being gone, there's a real chance this is like the second worst team in the SEC without those 2 guys. I think KJ Jefferson is historically one of the most underrated quarterbacks of the SEC in the last half decade, and Raheem
single-handedly won them the Florida game. He single-handedly won them the Florida game last year.
And Raheem Sanders in 2022 had like 1,400 yards and 10 touchdowns before battling some injuries last year, but like those 2 guys, I know KJ's at UCF and Raheem Sanders is at South Carolina now. Yeah, South Carolina. Losing those 2 guys to like other regional schools that like aren't really a prestige jump up from Arkansas is not only kind of a kick to the stomach, but also like that was your offensive engine. That was your plan. And losing those 2 guys, there's a real chance that Arkansas is like disastrously bad.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we both are kind of feel like this is probably it for Sam Pittman, barring something pretty surprising. I think it's probably going to happen on the early side. And that just brings me to, I think, the last thing I really have to say about this team, which is I'm not saying one thing or another is going to happen. I'm just making an observation. This team's offensive coordinator is Bobby Petrino.
Oh my God!
Just making an observation.
No.
I'm just asking.
Noticing. I'm just noticing and asking questions. Yeah. Oh no. You heard it here first, folks. Tyler Natuna thinks Bobby Petrino will coach a game for Arkansas this year.
It's gonna happen. No, but sticking within the SEC, because I think the SEC has a few guys that kind of
Oh
find
yeah.
themselves in similar situations. We're moving on to another team that's kind of in that same tier of new SEC teams that I just don't know where they stand in this new conference. We got Shane Beamer at South Carolina. This one's maybe like a little bit surprising. I'm not sure that if you're just thinking off the top of your head who's on the hot seat coming into this year, your mind might not go to Shane Beamer. But like, allow me to kind of make my case here, because I think the vibes here are pretty sour, to be honest with you. Not a lot to be very excited about other than a 2-game stretch in 2022 where you end the year dominating Tennessee and then beating your rival Clemson. Outside of that, though, this tenure just is not that exciting. I think he's had some mistakes from like a PR perspective. And I just don't love this team. I think Spencer Rattler was actually pretty underrated for what he was able to do at South Carolina the last 2 years. I think he was a very good quarterback for them. Lenora Sellers, I mean, we'll see. Like, I think they're pretty high on him, redshirt freshman, but like, you just don't know. It's hard to see them making a ton of noise here this year. And if they don't, like, what does Shane Beamer have to show after 3 years? Four? Is this 4 years for him?
This is your 4th.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, wow. Yeah, I don't know, man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm pretty pro Shane Beamer. I have him as a 3 on our scale. But I feel compelled to point out, like talking about teams that are a bit aimless in the current SEC, he took over a program that won 6 games in the previous 2 years, and he went 15-11 in his first 2 years with the program, which is like not. I feel like if you're South Carolina, your goal is like we want to consistently make bowl games at this point with what the SEC is becoming. Like basically, like not to insinuate that SEC might be going down this path, like don't give the SEC a reason to kick you out is like kind of the like make sure you're standing in the back of the room, but like not far enough back that might shrink it. But yeah, I think Rattler was underrated. I think the way he handled that offensive line was really impressive. Losing Xavier Legette and Juice Wells, who's an all SEC receiver in 2022 to Ole Miss, so in the conference sucks. And they're playing 6 preseason top 25 teams. I think the path for this team, for one thing, I think Beamer could be a good candidate for like potential like looking into 2025 hot seat of like I think if they go 4-8, 5-7, I don't think he gets fired unless it goes like catastrophically bad this year. But I think there's a chance like we get to December and everyone's like, is Shane Beamer the coach next year? And I think he will be, but I think like the real questions are going to be going into his 5th season with the program. I do the path is do Lenora Sellers and Raheem Sanders make one of the best like 5 rushing games in the SEC, which I think is like not a guarantee, especially with how the offensive line looked last year and without massive upgrades to my knowledge that they really seem to be much in much better shape. But those are 2 of the best. Like that is one of the better running backs in the SEC and one of the better potential dual threat quarterbacks in the SEC. There's a way to make a playbook specifically around the 2 of them that really creates issues even without Legette and Wells. And I think that's really the path. But I have him as a 3 because I think he would need to go like 3-9 to get fired this year. But I think he's like a 5-win season away from being a 5 next year.
Okay. So I kind of disagree there a little bit. I'm glad you mentioned their schedule because I pulled it up while you were talking. Like it's not Florida level, but man, it's pretty tough. Like
Yeah.
you got Ole Miss, you got Bama, you got LSU, you got Clemson, obviously. Like there's some tough games here. And that's kind of why
they go LSU, Ole Miss, Bama, Oklahoma in 5 games.
That's brutal, man. That's just
sucks.
Brutal.
That sucks.
And that's why like I'm a little more dire about this. Like I've got them at a 4. I think that they are going to have a real uphill battle to make a bowl game this year. And they missed one last year. And I think I think it really depends how this program sees itself in the new era of this sport. But I think if they're 5-7, man, like I think there is a really good chance we see a change here. It would not shock me at all. But I think you're right. I think probably the more likely scenario is a disappointing year leading into a ton of pressure in 2025. But like, I could totally see the floor falling out here this year, to be honest with you, especially with that schedule.
Yeah, this is not a name I expected you to put on the list for me to like have to prep for. So I'm glad that we
Mhm.
had this conversation because this is a fun
Yeah.
one.
Yeah, I think kind of this was probably the one, well, maybe one of two that was a little bit out there in the names that we picked for this week. But I think an interesting situation. And we've been talking about a couple, have-nots in this new iteration of the SEC. Let's, I think, move on to the preeminent have-not in the SEC, which is Vanderbilt and Clark Lee. Like, this is a weird one because, like, I don't even know what the hot seat means at Vanderbilt. Like, this program is just in such a tough spot right now, just because of what the new era of this sport means. Because like it's Vanderbilt, you can't go out and like run the transfer portal, and you get guys poached from you, and you can't go do the same, even from good G5 teams or whatever. Now, granted, you can do it to an extent because they got Diego Pavia, who was a really exciting quarterback last year at New Mexico State. I think that's maybe one of the few reasons I could talk myself into an improvement here. But like, man, this is just not in a great spot. They went 5-7 in 2022 with a couple nice upset wins that I think had everyone being like, okay, what's Clark Lee cooking here? And they followed that up with a really bad 2-10 last year. Just not competitive in the slightest. You lose to UNLV. Just not where this program needs to be at this point. And like I said, like I don't know where this program needs to be. Like, and that's why I only have Clark Lee as a 3, just because I don't know what he would have to do for them to be like, yeah, this isn't working. We need to go in a different direction, because I don't know what direction they could even possibly go in from here. But I think whatever momentum this Clark Lee experiment had has kind of been evaporated. And I think it's going to take quite a bit to get it back this season.
This was another one of my fives. Mostly because I agree with everything you said, but I think Vanderbilt is going to come at it from the perspective of why are we hitching our anchor to this guy instead
Mm-hmm.
of
Nice punt there.
what better could we do? Thank you. Haha. It was actually unintentional, believe it or not. I should have taken credit for that. Um, I think this is just kind of a dead program in the SEC. Like outside of the 3 James Franklin years, since 2009, they've won 5 games, not even 6, 5 games 4 times. I don't like what like your like the once a decade season is a bowl game.
Yeah.
Like
I think
I don't
James
really
Franklin
know.
may have ruined this program by just giving them a taste of something that is almost impossible to replicate, at least
And I just
consistently.
I if I were a up and coming like G5 coach, like let's play this game. I know we just talked about him last week with the G5 preview. If you're John Sumrall and you win 10 games at Tulane this year and Vanderbilt calls, do you even pick up the phone?
No, no,
Yeah. Like
absolutely not.
this job sucks. This is a
Yeah.
terrible job. And I think this is just going to be a revolving door every 4 or 5 years for the next 2 decades, if not longer, because I don't know what a coach can do to like earn any momentum. And college
Yeah.
football programs can't afford to just keep a coach with no momentum. Like it just is a lame duck. But everyone's going to be a lame duck because it's kind of all you can afford to be.
Which they kind
So
of
I
did. I
just
mean, they kind
don't.
of did with Derek Mason, to be fair. Like he was
Yeah.
like that star had
But
diminished pretty early, but they
But
gave him quite some time.
Derek Mason at least had like multiple 6-win seasons and like 5-win seasons. So at least there
Yeah.
was like Derek Mason was like cyclical of like every 2 or 3 years he would like win enough games that they couldn't fire him.
Yeah.
But it's not like the schedule was going to get any easier. They're like you just added Texas and Oklahoma to a conference that you're already the runt to the litter. I don't really
Yeah.
know
And like
what
you
else
can
there is
talk
to do.
yourself into, like, I think you can talk yourself into at least an individual Arkansas team or individual South Carolina team or individual Kentucky team making some noise. But this Vandy team is just never going to be in a position to do
Nope.
that.
Nope.
It's hard. And that's kind of why I'm less confident they're going to fire him, just because I think that uncertainty may give them pause. But I see where you're coming from, to where it's like, well, we can't just keep doing this because this is not
Yeah.
working.
I think this Vanderbilt team like might win 3 games. And I think if you do that
Yeah.
again, you like it doesn't matter what the expectations are supposed to be. You can't pitch the fan base that we're keeping this guy around.
And I think if they make any progress at all, like 4-8 even, that's probably fine. But if you're knocking on the door of 2-10, 3-9 again, I think we could be having that conversation.
Yeah.
But that's going to take us out of the SEC and to the Big 12 with kind of another guy who maybe we thought could find himself in trouble last season, ultimately survived, albeit kind of had his hand forced to make quite a few changes to the staff. Dave Aranda at Baylor. I'll just say this. They were awful last year. This team sucked last year.
Has anybody had a weirder tenure than Dave Aranda at Baylor? It's just so strange.
Because they win the Big 12 in 2021. They go 12-2, win the Big 12.
Win into your 6th game.
Yeah.
They finished 7th they finished 5th in the final AP poll, and he's 11-23 outside of that season.
But man, this has been a mess. A mess since
in the world.
They started last year, I think they kind of set the tone early, getting absolutely destroyed by Texas State. And then just had some other, like one of their 3 wins last year. They went 3-9, I believe. One of their 3 wins was UCF, a game they had to overcome like a 3-touchdown deficit to win in like ridiculous fashion. I mean, I will say, like, there does seem to be optimism here. I kind of get the sense that they feel like they're going to take a step forward. Obviously, like I mentioned, coordinator changes on both sides of the ball. Speaking of Texas State, bringing in their former head coach, Jake Spavital, to run the offense here. And he's got a new quarterback in DeQuan Finn from Toledo, who was pretty good for Toledo last year. I think they will take a leap. I think they will be better enough to shut down hot seat conversations. Like, I like Dave Aranda. I think this was kind of a weird fit. A lot of people were right, I think, to clock this as a weird fit with him in a Texas job like this. But I do like Dave Aranda, and I think they turn it around. I just don't know if this team is really set to make any noise, even in a Big 12 that's kind of wide open.
Yeah, so this was my third 5. So I guess we clock that in, mostly because I don't really have a ton of faith in them taking that leap. And I think that the power vacuum of the Big 12 that you just talked about without Texas and Oklahoma now almost works against him, because now there's no excuse to, like, straight up, like 6-6 might still like keep him in question. Like, it's an improvement that he could like probably keep his job with 6-6, but if you go 6-6, you're probably still on like flaming hot for next year. Of like, this is a program that has its sights set on being one of the powers of the Big 12, and you did not take over a broken program. Matt Rule like rebuilt this program from the brink and then handed you the keys. Like, you took over for a team that won 11 games the year before you got there, and a head coach who got an NFL job based on how well he did with your program. And you're 11-23 outside of your best season. I just don't. Their point differential last year was 10.2 points per game. They scored 23.1 points and allowed 33 points. Like, I don't know if the track record outside of 2021 is this bad, where the expectations were so high when you got there. I don't know if I'm willing to chalk that up to the coordinators last year. And I like Dave Aranda I think he's a fun presence in college football and seems like a cool dude, but you're also adding to the like every football team thinks they're going to make the leap in the offseason. And you have to pitch that to everybody. I get why. I'm not holding it against them for that or saying anything negative to them for that. But you also, like, when you show up with the We Play Players shirts at practice, like, you're kind of putting a target on your back as a team that like sucked a year ago. And the Big 12 is weak, but it's not totally bereft of talent. Like, a 5-win season in the Big 12 is probably worse than like a 4-win season in the SEC at this point. And I don't know if I have enough faith in Aranda kind of like making that leap enough forward. I think he would, like, obviously me saying 5 means he's going to get fired this year. So maybe I'm kind of couching that a little bit, but I think he would need to win 7 or 8 games to not be in a pot of boiling water for 2025. And I don't really, frankly, have enough faith in Baylor taking that large of a step forward when they've sucked for 3 of the 4 years he's been there.
Yeah, I do think that's fair. I do really like Dave Aranda as a coach. I think he's proven. I think he's proven himself at least as a defensive coach.
I agree. He's a good mind and seems like a good hang.
If Baylor, put it this way, if Baylor fired Dave Aranda this year, he will be the hottest defensive coordinator candidate in the entire country.
Absolutely.
So
And some guys are coordinators.
yeah, and maybe that's true. And you know, and again, maybe this was just a weird fit too at Baylor. Like, I mean, I think Texas to coach in Texas, I feel like more than pretty much any other state requires like just esoteric knowledge that guys that haven't coached in Texas might not have. Um, and maybe that's going to be his downfall here. I'm taking a bit of a leap of faith with him. I've got him as a 3 just because I do think they are better this year. And I think they do good enough to cool that seat down at least for the time being. But like, I can't really argue with any point you just made. This is, of all the picks I've made today, this one's probably the most that's just vibes based.
I was not expecting me to be the pessimist of the two of us. This is a bit of
Yeah.
a new
Well,
development.
I'm trying not to be a hater. I'm trying to
Okay,
be more optimistic about the
I'm
world
proud of
and
you.
life in general. So, but
I'm proud of you, Tyler. It's a big
that's
development.
yeah, I know. That's all we've got for the Big 12, though. I think most people there are in a pretty secure spot. And that's kind of the case for the next conference we're going to talk about too, in the Big 10. Like, I don't think there are many coaches here who are in danger coming into this year. I think it's a lot of new coaches in either their
Well,
first or second season. Well, we'll get to it. We'll get
yeah,
to it.
okay, yeah.
But there's I think a lot of coaches here that are in their like first or second seasons or just otherwise are at programs that, you know, have very minimal expectations that they've been more or less meeting. But with that being said, I think there's one sort of wild card here that could break things open. It's Ryan Day at Ohio State. Now, both of us like Ryan Day. Both of
Okay.
us think it's kind of preposterous to an extent.
Outrageous. Yeah.
Yeah, the criticism Ryan Day has received from a lot of Ohio State fans. But like, to be fair, this is Ohio State. It's probably the most consistent college football program in the modern era. And because of that, you don't just get credit for going 10-2, 11-1. Like, that's what they've established the floor as. So, you know, you've kind of to be meeting expectations at Ohio State, you've kind of got to sequentially be beating Michigan, winning the Big Ten, making a run in the college football playoff. And those are things they haven't been doing under Ryan Day the last few years. And maybe not fair, but just the reality of the situation, the pressure's ramping up here. And they've got a really, really good roster. Like, a lot of people have them as the preseason national title pick, myself included. But
Oh, neat. I didn't know that.
oh yeah, I do. Oh, I'm way in on this Ohio
Big
State.
Jeremiah Smith guy.
Yo, 100%. So that's kind of why, though, like, and you're the one that kind of wanted to talk about this, so I'll let you kind of get into your feelings here. But that's kind of why I think this is interesting, because the expectations are so high. What happens if they disappoint again?
Yeah, I mean, I think the fun part about this is like I talked about the knife's edge with Pittman, but I think Day's a better example. Like, if they make that field goal in the last play of the game against Georgia, he has a national championship on his
Yeah.
resume in the last 12 months.
And this
Like,
conversation we're not even having. It doesn't matter.
no,
So,
he
yeah.
he would have like a lifetime contract to be at Ohio State until he was done. It doesn't matter how many times. Oh, I mean, you could lose to Michigan for like a decade straight, and we could have that
Yeah.
conversation. But like, you win a national championship there. Yeah, I think this is a really weird one because I think simultaneously I agree with the idea that like most fans are like, I could probably have won 50 games the last 5 seasons at Ohio State in my sleep, and I don't think they're wrong. Like, I think I could have coached that team to 8-4. But at the same point, uh, I think we live in. I always want to keep in mind that part of a college football coach's job is getting that talent in the building. And yes, it seems like Ryan Day is underperforming with the talent he has, but part of why it feels like he's underperforming is because he's one of the best recruiters in the country. Um, and that was the Kirby. We had this debate. I'm not saying he's gonna like win two consecutive national championships, but we had this debate with Kirby Smart for like a half decade of like, is Kirby not doing enough with the talent he gets in the building? And then the question finally got off his back. And I think Kirby
Yeah.
is a better program runner than Ryan Day, but I think Ryan Day is not much further behind like 2020, 2021 Kirby Smart than we think. Um, I think Harbaugh specifically is a coach pretty well suited to take down Ryan Day and that program. I think the weird debate that I had with myself before last year, obviously when Michigan wins the national championship, is I thought Ohio State was better suited to beat Alabama and Georgia, but Michigan was like perfectly suited to beat Ohio State. Um, and then I think Ryan Day, like the real path to Ryan Day ending up genuinely on the hot seat to me is if he keeps going down the path it looked like he started going down in 2023, which was it looked like he started trying to beat Michigan at their game. Like it looked like
Mhm.
he was really, really good in 2020 to 2022. If you ignore the noise and you understand, like you have to get to the college football playoff, but the difference between winning 11 games and winning 13 games in a national championship, you need a few things to break your way. And you miss the kick, and that sucks. But it feels transparent to me that you're letting the noise get in your head if you start changing the way that you approach the game for one specific team. Because you are never going to beat Michigan at physical football. You are never going to beat Michigan at defensive football. Not in the Harbaugh era, probably not in the Sharon Moore era. Um, and if we go into this season, and granted, this is a bit of a catch-22 because I think this would probably play to your strengths with Will Howard, who I think is at his best as like a West Coast style scrambling quarterback who can kind of like pick teams apart underneath with the option of tucking and running. Um, but if he comes out again and tries to like lean further and further into that, he might be a guy who's like kind of too online. And I think that's the real downfall here. If you're Ryan Day, is trying to prove people wrong or trying to prove a point instead of just doing what Kirby Smart did at Georgia, which is trusting that if you get the right talent in the building and you are a good enough coach or as good of a coach as you think you are, eventually you will win the big one, even if you have a Nick Saban in your conference or a Jim Harbaugh or a Sharon Moore in your conference. So I think that's the real danger for Ryan Day. I personally think that like there are people using the New Year's Six Bowl when they like had a bunch of opt outs against him. I think it's a little goofy. I think Ryan Day is going to be someone that we look back on in 5 years and be like, why did anyone think this guy was going to get fired? Um, but I think it's a conversation we had to have because it's one of the most dominant conversations on social media every time Ohio State loses a game. And I think it's going to get even worse. I know I've been rambling for a long time now, but I think it's going to get even worse with what the Big Ten looks like now because first impressions really matter to your fan base. And the first impression to the Ohio State fan base is the mark of a successful season is undefeated winning the Big Ten. The Big Ten's getting harder and it's going to keep getting harder. You have Oregon and Washington now, USC and UCLA. Um, you are not one of two national championship contenders anymore in the conference. I guess two and a half with Penn State, um, but like you're not. It's like Ohio State, Michigan is not a de facto playoff game anymore. You are probably going to need to beat two or three top 10 teams a year now going forward. But the first impression in anybody's mind is if Ryan Day loses two games, he's failing. And are people really going to come around on that if he starts having to play Washington and UCLA and USC more often, or are people going to stick to that old, like the old philosophy and think that Ryan Day can be the fifth winningest coach in college football and still stink?
Yeah. I mean, to me, I think what made last season really hard to swallow for Ohio State is like you said, they developed the entire identity of that team around beating Michigan, and it worked kind of. Like their defense, which was a legit issue, they got absolutely bulldozed in those prior two games against Michigan. You know, they were running like three tight end sets. Ohio State had no answer for it. And their defense was fantastic last year. Like it took a massive step forward, and it still wasn't enough to beat Michigan because you had those issues on offense. Now, I think that will be better. I think Will Howard is an upgrade over Kyle McCord, who had his limitations.
They were driving down the field down 6 against Michigan on the last possession.
Yeah.
Like even with all the issues, they almost beat them.
Yeah. And that's why, like, you can't, the man is 56-8. Like he's 56
Yeah, this
and
is
8.
it's just such a stupid conversation that we like
And
have to have.
that's why I have him as a 2.
Yeah,
Because
I
I
have him as
do
a
think,
1. I'm
yeah,
ignoring this. I'm
that's
done.
fair.
Yeah, no
Like,
thanks.
I think to me, it just is as simple as I think he's going to do the things he needs to do this year. Like, I think they are going to beat Michigan because NCAA stuff aside, I just don't think this Michigan team's all that great. I think they're going to take a significant step back. I think they're going to win the Big Ten unless Oregon's just insane. But even if they are, like Ohio State's, I don't see any reality where this Ohio State team is not in the college football playoff. And I mean, they're my title pick. Obviously, that's going to require more to go right now than it previously did, just because there's more postseason games. But I think they're at the very least going to make a run and be in that mix. And that's, I think, going to be plenty for Ryan Day to shut down any of these conversations.
Ryan Day, I think he had a chance to win national championships in the forward team era. So I don't think he's like the coach that benefits the most from the expansion, but he's up there because I think his style of football and his schematic plan is built to win playoff games. I think it's obviously a very pro style team. He's an incredibly gifted offensive mind. And he's always overperformed once he reached the big stage. Like he gave Georgia a better fight in 2022 than he gave Michigan. And really, Michigan's probably the only team that could have stood in their way for the style of football they were playing with CJ Stroud. And I think that him having nearly a guaranteed playoff spot every year, I would be more surprised if Ryan Day doesn't have a national championship by 2027 than if he does.
Yeah,
I think
agree.
he wins one of the next 4.
And I'd be even more surprised. Like, I think he's more likely to have a national title than lose this job at any point.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
In the near future. Yeah, I doubt that a lot of the pressure that the fan base puts on Ryan Day is actually being put in place by the administration. Like, I don't think they are even close to what it would take for them to consider making a move from Ryan Day.
No, I agree.
But looking elsewhere in the Big Ten, like I said, not a lot of guys that could find themselves on the hot seat. I've got one here who I think maybe this could be it. I got Brett Bielema
This can be
Illinois.
This can be a quick one. Yeah.
Yeah, this can be a quick one. Like, there's really not a ton to say here. They had some nice momentum pretty early. I think he tried to bring his style of play from what he was doing at Wisconsin and I guess a little bit at Arkansas, tried to bring that to Illinois, and the early returns were pretty solid. They went 8-5 in 2022. But the main reason that team was so successful was the defense, which lost Ryan Walters, the defensive coordinator, is now the head coach at Purdue. And they missed him last year. They took a significant step back, I think. Like, there's reasons to think this team could be all right. I mean, they got their starting quarterback back and Luke Altmaier, the former Ole Miss quarterback who's been there for a little bit now. They got Jakari Franklin, I think a pretty interesting pickup, former Ole Miss receiver transfer there now. I just like, it's Illinois, man. Like, the expectations aren't that high, but at the same time, you're still in the Big Ten. The Big Ten is even better now, and the Big Ten West is gone. So you don't even get the easier draw of these teams. Like, I know the expectations aren't sky high here, but I have it at a 4. I kind of feel like this is falling off here.
I had him as a 3. I think this is weird because I think it's the same conversation, obviously with a little bit higher expectations we had around Vanderbilt, but I think we're swapping how we feel about it. Of like, when for Clark Lea, it was like, I just think it's like kind of over, even if there's no reason for him to be doing better than he is. And for Bielema, I'm like, hey, he's won 5 games every year. He's 12-15 in the Big Ten. Like, realistically, I think Illinois kind of needs to ask itself what it is in like the Big Ten Super Conference. And I don't know if it's much more than what Bielema is doing. And like, obviously, you want to make a bowl game, and so like winning 5 games every year isn't quite enough. But
the floor can go lower. The floor can and has been lower than it is.
The floor can and has been lower, and I think Bielema, like, dealing with issues around the transfer portal and dealing with a new era that ushers teams toward bigger and bigger programs, or ushers players toward bigger and bigger programs. I don't think consistently winning 5 games at Illinois, like, I think that's like 7-8 years might get you on the hot streak. I don't know if it's like by year 4.
Yeah, I agree. This one I just put on there because of all the Big Ten names. Like, if I had to pick one that's not there next year for any reason, really, this would probably be the one I would go with. I guess maybe barring what is in those text messages for Sharon Moore, I guess. But sure. Whatever.
Or I guess Nebraska bottoming out, I guess. But
yeah, I guess so.
I don't think they have too much money in Rule.
No,
that's
I like the trajectory there. Overall.
I do too, but
yeah, I think the Big Ten pretty standard. I don't think we're going to see a lot of change there after the season, barring some surprises. No. Maybe more so in the ACC though. And we're starting off with, I think, a guy who it's hard to say he's on the hot seat right now, but like,
but he could.
He could so easily get there. He could get there
easily.
He could get there by 4:30 p.m. Eastern on August 31st, man.
Oh yeah.
We got Mario Cristobal from Miami. Like, I felt so good about this hire when they made it. Like, my take was like, if they can, if Miami getting back is even possible, this guy will do it. And like, yeah, mate, like the returns, recruiting and talent acquisition, pretty good. Like, I like their roster overall this year. I think it's pretty solid. It's just like, how confident do you actually feel about what Mario Cristobal is building here, just considering the games that they've lost?
I think Cristobal might get burned by the new era of college football more than any other Power Four coach, just because his specialty was I'm going to get the most talent in the building, and I'm absolutely horrendous at game management, and I'm not exceptionally gifted schematically, but I'm going to have a better team than you. And then he got to Miami, and his whole shtick, like that was the plan, is like just keep racking up top 5, top 10 recruiting classes, and eventually it'll balance out. And then college football introduces a bunch of legislation that makes it easier for other Power Four teams to like keep racking up upperclassmen talent from smaller schools through the transfer portal and like lure in top recruits through NIL collectives. And I think it kind of nullifies the thing, like if every Power Four program or every top 15, 20 Power Four program can recruit as well as Cristobal, he's probably the worst in-game coach of those 20. Just looking at
Yeah.
whether it be mind-numbing mistakes against Georgia Tech, which is not stunningly not the first time he's lost a game by choosing not to kneel it out.
Mm-hmm.
Just like some horrendous game management decisions, tracking back even to when he was at Oregon. But this is just the total knife's edge between like if Cam Ward pans out, they could win the ACC, especially the current ACC, where I think they're like FSU obviously deserves to be number one in the preseason poll until proven otherwise after the last 2 years. But losing Keon Coleman, losing Jared Verse, losing Jordan Travis, and throwing DJ Uiagalelei back in there, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility that Florida State's just like a good, not great 8-win team with the talent they lost and who's under center for them now. Um, and Clemson failed to win 10 games for the first time since 2010 last year. Like there is a easy power vacuum for Cristobal to step up. And I think it ties back to the conversation we had at Baylor for Aranda, but even on a higher level, like I think Cristobal could win 9 games and still be on the hot seat for 2025. Like this is a conference that is just begging for Miami to step up and be what it was around the turn of the century. I want to point out, like they fired Manny Diaz for going 21-15 in his first 3 years. Mario's 12-13.
Yeah.
Like you win 9 games, you have technically a worse record than Diaz did because you would have one extra game on the schedule.
Yeah. No,
And
it's
you've set a precedent now that 7-8 wins a year is not enough, and you paid a guy astronomically more than you paid the other guy who was winning 7-8 games a year with the entire intention of like, we need you to take us back into college football playoff contention. The path to the college football playoff just got easier. Like, I don't think there's anyone with a wider range of outcomes this year than Mario Cristobal. Because if Cam Ward, I have the highest opinion of. I think he could be a sleeper Heisman finalist. I think he's a pretty dominant favorite for ACC Player of the Year. He could have like a 4,000 total yard, 40 touchdown season. But Miami is like very sneaky, quietly in like make the playoff or bust mode with Cristobal. Like I don't think you can keep going 8-4.
Wait, you think they're make the playoff or bust this season?
No, I don't think
okay.
he's like going. I don't think like missing the playoff gets him fired immediately. But I think missing the playoff this year, next year might become make the playoff or bust. Like if Cade Klubnik doesn't step forward and Florida State doesn't win 12 games again, and Miami goes like 9-3, if all three of those things happen, I think 2025 might be make the playoff or bust for Cristobal. Because I think it's like, okay, there's no real program challenging you in the ACC. Like, what are you doing?
Mm-hmm. I think Cristobal is standing at Miami going into 2025. Because I'll just say I have him as a 3. I think he probably is fine this year.
Yeah. I have him as a 2. For everything I just said, I have him as a 2.
Okay.
I don't think he's getting fired. But
what I will say, I think it could be a really fine line here on how we view the outcome of this season. Like, I think an 8-4 versus a 7-5, where you drop a game in similar fashion to Georgia Tech, like that could make all the difference in terms of perception here. And again, that's probably not enough to fire him, but I mean, like the expectations for Cristobal were really high when he came in, and he's not meeting them.
Nope.
And despite the fact that they've recruited pretty well, they've portaled pretty well. And I think we both like the state of their roster this year, like with Cam Ward, like you mentioned. So if you're not pushing in an ACC that I think neither of us feel great about the top end contenders in FSU and Clemson, if you're not pushing them, like that's a problem. And I think it's also hard to feel great considering like FSU and Clemson are getting all this, realignment hype. Maybe they're going to the Big Ten. Miami's kind of not been in those conversations as much. I don't know what the future is here at this program, but I think this is an important year for Cristobal for sure. But I think a guy that I would say has a lot more odds of us seeing some movement there this year up at Pittsburgh, Pat Narduzzi. Another one that kind of in the Dave Aranda vein, like, man, did this thing go downhill quickly, because even more quickly than Dave Aranda, because they won the ACC in 2021 and then still were pretty solid in 2022, went like 9-4. And then it just completely fell off last year. 3-9 season, just really disappointing. And I think if it were just a one-off year, I would be less bearish on Narduzzi's odds of getting this back on track, because he's been there a while and achieved a decent amount of consistency. But I don't love the trajectory here, mostly because of the fact that they can't figure out the offensive coordinator situation. Mark Whipple, who was there when Kenny Pickett was there and they were having all the success, it literally seems like to me, like Pat Narduzzi was upset that the offense was too good and wanted a worse offense, because that's not how he likes to play football, because it fell off. And then last year with Frank Cignetti just didn't work at all. They're making another change. They brought in Cade Bell from Western Carolina, a young guy, coming up from the FCS ranks. We'll see if that's what this team needs. I mean, at quarterback, they've got Nate Yarnell, who had a couple positive moments at the end of last year, and then Eli Holstein, a former blue chip recruit transfer from Alabama. But I don't think either of those guys, you're like, this is going to turn everything around this year. I've got Narduzzi as a 4. I think there's a pretty good chance we see a change here this year.
I agree. I don't think Narduzzi has ever been the most charismatic head coach in the country. I don't think he's ever been the ideal locker room man. But like you said, been 500 or better 7 times in 9 seasons, but he's only won 9 games twice. He's like the platonic ideal of we're going to go 7-5 every year.
Yeah.
But he I don't think he can handle the hot seat press wise, because he was the locker room management was stunningly bad last year. He went to the media after a game and said, we wanted to replace the good players we lost, and we obviously didn't do a good job of that. Almost verbatim. I think I'm butchering
not a great thing. Not a great thing to say.
There were players
you're not even really paraphrasing. That's pretty much what he said.
I think the exact wording is wrong, but that's what he said.
Yeah.
I know that he said we need to replace good. We wanted to do a good job replacing good players, and obviously we didn't. I think was the exact quote. And you had players revolting on social media. I think
a lot of transfers specifically, all their transfer additions from the last offseason were okay, thanks.
Yeah, shout out safety Donovan McMillan, who's high key one of the better defensive backs in the ACC, former Florida safety. But I just don't think he is a good leader of men, to use a really cliche term. And I think that's a really easy reason why I think I agree with you. Despite a pretty consistently very good tenure, if not consistently great tenure for what Pittsburgh kind of is, I think if this goes south again, I don't think they can handle 2 bad Narduzzi years. I just think he's a guy who's going to shoot himself in the foot too many times if they go 4-8 again.
I don't think the material circumstances here are as bad as some of the other coaches we've talked about on this list, but man, I just, the vibes here are just so bad. The vibes here really are horrendous. No, it feels like it's just one of those situations that just feels like there's no way this gets turned around this year. And we've seen that happen before where it can. I mean, this time last year, I think we both probably would have had Neil Brown as a 5. And Neil Brown not only is still the coach at West Virginia, but not even on this list this year. So
he's totally fine.
So you can turn things. I don't think this is a parallel situation to that, to be clear.
No, because I don't think I think like Neil Brown needed to show a sign of life. Narduzzi needs to like keep being good enough that his personality doesn't get him fired. Maybe I'm being too harsh on that one quote, but like that's kind of the feeling.
I don't think so.
Like it's like he feels like he needs to like give them reasons to not fire him.
And especially with it seeming like they had issues, like he had issues jiving with Mark Whipple. Like this is, I think, a problem that he has, and I'm not sure that he is the best person to work with. Like just being real about it.
And I don't think like you can win 7 games at Pittsburgh and that's impressive. I don't think that's good enough to like overcome being a bit of a nuisance.
And if you're like if you're a great vibes guy, maybe it's program like Pittsburgh can look past that, but he's just not. So
very much not.
No. So I think this is probably outside of Sam Pittman, I would say this is the one I feel most likely will open of the names that we talked about today.
I know I gave Aranda and Clarkley 5s and Narduzzi a 4. I think Narduzzi is my second most likely guy on this list to get fired mid-season.
Yeah.
I think Aranda and Lee might get fired after the year. I think there's a real chance that Narduzzi like starts 2-4, says something stupid, and gets canned.
Yeah. Yeah, and those are all the guys that we sort of prepped for. But like one last thing we wanted to do, kind of off the radar, and Ryan and I do not know who we are about to say, but we were going to say.
I really wonder if we're going to say the same person.
There's a good chance. Well, I have a backup in mind just in case that is what happens. But this is basically what we're saying here is if things break really badly, like who's the name that is by no means on the hot seat, but like one that we could see a semi-realistic chance where that changes at some point in the next 6 months. So I'll let you go first, Ryan. Hit me with it.
Take everything that I said about Mario Cristobal, copy and paste it for James Franklin.
Ooh, that's not one of the ones I was thinking of, but it was sort of a consideration. That's a good pick.
Like, this is the guy who the 12-team playoff should benefit the most, because his entire argument is like, I have to beat both Michigan and Ohio State effectively in one season to make the playoff. And it's like, now there's a realistic chance that you could lose both of those games and still be like ranked in the top 12. You consistently have been losing both of those games and still ranked in the top 12. And I think Franklin and Lane Kiffin are the two biggest names I have. I don't think Lane Kiffin's close to the hot seat with how well the transfer portal went and how different expectations are at Ole Miss. But I think those are the two biggest names I have of like, those are guys who consistently come in as like everybody's sleeper playoff team that never actually makes it and never actually gains super serious momentum to make it. And now the expectations are lower. And so I'm like, are you guys like, everybody's idea of overachieving for these programs has been like 10 wins. Or like for Franklin, it's like a great Penn State season is 11-1, and he constantly goes 10-2. Now a great Penn State season is 10-2. Does he suddenly start going 9-3? Like is James Franklin consistently one win below where he needs to be? Because if that's the case, I think the 12-win playoff makes it harder to hide that. I think you had an easier time, and Penn State, like for all the fact that they felt like third fiddle in the Big Ten. Massive alumni network with a lot of money and a lot of fans who want to win, like contend for national championships. And I don't think you can hide if you start winning 8 or 9 games in this era. Like I know the Big Ten just got harder, but if you start like finishing 13th or 14th in the college football playoff poll and like barely missing the playoff, I think we could like really destabilize very quickly and like up there.
Yeah. I think James Franklin has been kind of facing a weird vibe situation for a few years now. And I think, that's a good point you make, because the last few years that we've talked about this team, it's been kind of framed around, will they make the leap to being a CFP team? They don't have to make the leap now. Nope. They could have a normal Penn State year for them. They're hosting a playoff game in Happy Valley. So, it's like you just have to get over that hump now. You just have to
not screw up.
Yeah. And they don't play both. They don't have both of Ohio State and Michigan this year, right? They just play.
I didn't look at their schedule when I did this.
I think they just have Ohio State. I might be wrong about that. But yeah, I mean, I think I could see, like, I don't really think that happens because I think they probably do have the typical Penn State year that they need. And by the way, yes, they have Ohio State and they have USC, but they do not have Michigan. So,
Okay.
yeah, like
No
I
Oregon?
think that no, don't believe so.
Yeah, okay. There's
Um,
no excuse to not make the playoff this year if
yeah,
you're
no,
Jeff
they have
Franklin.
no playoff or bust, 100%. And if they don't, like maybe they do
And
find
I
themselves.
don't necessarily. I think James Franklin deserves faith in, like, potential playoff. He absolutely does not deserve implicit faith that he will do that. Like,
No,
that's
yeah,
a very reasonable question.
like you should expect that they do, but I don't think it's a lock by any
No,
means, given the way that
absolutely
this
not.
program has a tendency to underachieve, whatever the expectations are. Like you said, even when the
Especially
expectations vary.
especially because Drew Aller looked terrible against great defenses last year. And you might only play one great defense. If Ohio State and USC are the two great teams on your schedule, you're probably only going to play one great defense. But Drew Aller, for a guy who was like kind of brought in as the savior, one co-host on this podcast who shall not be named thought they were actually a genuine threat to win the Big Ten last year, according to a
Yeah, I did.
conversation we both had in the
I did.
preseason.
I did.
Yeah. I feel like most of that was because of Drew Aller hype and the kind
Yeah.
of prospect he was. And he didn't just look bad against Ohio State and Michigan. He looked like non-viable against Ohio State and Michigan. And obviously, it's like your first year as a starter. He was an underclassman. You're going to get better, but like Franklin's been there a while, and I think it's very reasonable to think we are now at the point with the tier program that Penn State is that not making the playoff is a bad season, regardless, especially now.
Yeah. I mean, it really is, like, especially with, I think, the new programs coming in aside from Oregon. I think we all have pretty significant questions about, like, you should
Truly.
still be in that high tier 2 or low tier 1 of the Big Ten. And
At
that should
worst, the
be,
fourth team in the conference.
yeah, and that should be good enough to get you in the playoffs almost every year. And if they're not, yeah, that's gonna raise some questions about James Franklin. I think kind of a somewhat similar situation that I've got. Let me just pitch something to you. Let me just tell me how you feel about the phrase Dabo Sweeney hot seat.
Yes. Okay. I was really hoping you would do this specifically.
Yeah. Yeah. So, like,
Hell
let's
yeah. That's
just let's
awesome.
just say this. So Dabo is obviously beloved at Clemson, and I think
Yeah.
that's diminishing a little bit. I do, like, I've got family who are Clemson fans. Like, there is some
I'm sorry.
Dabo, yeah, there is some Dabo trutherism going on right now. Like, I think there is an element of starting to question the way this thing is going, and, like, I think they should get back into the ACC contention conversation this year. They should get back into the college football playoff conversation this year. If they don't, like, you are like, it's not, the floor is not collapsing here, but they are on a clear downward trajectory at the moment. Like, it's pretty easy to trace, and you're not taking guys in the portal. So every time that you lose a good defensive player to the draft, that's just diminishing talent. And you're not recruiting well enough. You're recruiting decently well, but not well enough to make up for it. Now, like, the big key here is the floor has not fallen out here yet. Like, even when absolutely everything goes wrong, this is still an 8-4 team. And there's something to be said for that. Can he survive like a 6-6? Like, if they fall to like 7-5 or 6-6 this year, and it becomes apparent that Cade Klubnik's not the answer, and there's no expectation that Dabo is going to go like portal a really good quarterback because he's never done that before. What is there to, like, how do you not feel like this era of the sport has just passed Clemson by? Like, how do you not feel like their time at the top of college football is just gone, and not really even, there's not even really a clear path to get back?
I also think you can trace the point we were making about Narduzzi. I think it's different. I think Narduzzi's abrasive, and Dabo's kind of corny. But I think you can kind of trace the same point of, like, a lot of the stuff Dabo says and does only works because Dabo wins 11 games a year.
Yeah.
And, like, if Dabo does the whole, like, if I were coaching at a program that's not Clemson, I would have a top 5 transfer portal class, and then goes like 7-5. They're gonna be like pitchforks and torches outside of his office. Like,
And they still,
he's just
even at
he's
8
just
and 4,
kind of a corny dude.
yeah,
Like, corniness works when you are winning, but
yeah,
corniness is a really easy way to annoy people, especially when it, like, to be polite, like a lot of his corniness comes from a place that sounds like narcissism.
Mhm.
And like that doesn't really work if you are declining, like actively declining and people are watching it. Um, so I think there's a like I think Clemson I don't think Clemson will be bad enough to make this a real possibility, but I think it's a reasonable chance that there's a world where Clemson goes 7-5. Dabo says like something about God's name, image, and likeness in midseason, and everyone's like, "Oh my gosh, is this deteriorating in front of our eyes?"
Yeah. And I think that, you know, like I said, I think Dabo could so easily, like if they just come out and go 10-2 or 11-1 or whatever, like everyone will be back in, and
Mhm.
he'll have silenced this
Absolutely.
pressure. But if he doesn't, because it was starting to come, like I think Clemson fans are starting to maybe open their eyes to maybe, this thing that Dabo was selling this whole time either wasn't quite what he made it out to be, or just isn't possible anymore in this new era of the sport. And the
Yeah.
fact of the matter is, like, if you can't adjust, it doesn't matter what you've done in the
No.
past. And I think we were even starting to see that with a coach as good as Nick Saban. I think even he was not like the floor fell out there either, but I think that we saw whatever advantage he once had kind of fell away. Like they kind of just fell into the mix of really good teams.
It's totally reasonable to think that Dabo Swinney is the second best college football coach from an era that no longer exists. That's totally fine.
Yeah.
That is probably the most healthy way to view his career. But like we had this conversation as friends last season. I think his relationship with the transfer portal might have actively cost him the Alabama job if he wanted it. He obviously
Yeah.
has said that he wanted to stay in Clemson, but it's his alma mater. Like I think if Saban retired in 2022, Alabama makes Dabo say no. And I think Saban retiring last year, they're like, Dabo, do you want this? And he's like, no. I'm like, okay, cool.
I don't
Like,
want to get
I
too
still think
lost
he
in
was
the
probably
weeds.
I think he was probably still the first call, but I think there's a
Yeah.
non-zero chance this changed his trajectory.
I don't want to get lost in the weeds on this, but I actually think that ship, the Alabama ship, I think that sailed before 2020. I think that has been, I think if Nick Saban had retired circa 2018, absolutely. I think Dabo is
Okay,
the coach of
fair.
Alabama. But I think that it's been pretty apparent for a while that is not the kind of fit that Alabama was going to be looking for in a post Nick Saban era.
That's fair.
And we'll just have to see. Like I said, like they could easily shut me up by winning 10 games this year, and then it's fine. And then maybe
Like,
you learn and take a couple portal guys. Like maybe, I don't know.
but like,
But
not, and this goes against everything we argued about for Ryan Day, but like, winning 10 games was like Dabo's floor from 2011 to 2022. Like, that was
yeah,
what he
but
did
we
every
are still
year.
talking about Clemson versus Ohio State, and one of them has a lot more built-in advantages than the
Yeah,
other does. Like, I think this is
absolutely.
more a function of he just set the standard so incredibly unrealistically high at Clemson. But at some point, like that's the standards you
Yeah,
set. Like you got to keep living up to it.
yeah.
And if you're not, we might be having some uncomfortable conversations. But I think that's going to just about do it for our episode this week. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back next week as we get another week closer to getting to the season. We're really coming down the home stretch here. So thanks for listening. We will see you next week.
Thank you, everybody.